Okay, let's take a look at this cartoon version of Martin Luther's journey in basically starting the Protestant Reformation, and let's do a reaction to it. Oh, National Geographic, okay. So right now we know it's produced by a reputable source. They're going to get big pushback if there's something really wrong here, so I expect not a lot of controversy, not a lot of bias, because it is a very famous source that has a reputation that they do want to uphold. Okay.
A most precise and nuanced look into the life of the man, legend and visionary, Martin Luther. Sir.
Okay, so right now you know that they're doing a little humor because there's no way this can be a precise and nuanced look. The video is 5 minutes long, so it starts off with a little humor, and then they run out of room for his name. So you know this is going to be a little tongue-in-cheek. They're going to try to put some smile on your face.
One day, when Luther is 21 years old, he experiences something which will affect him for the rest of his life. Suddenly, a thunderstorm erupts, a wild, violent one. Luther is terrified of being struck by lightning and dying because all his life he has been told that he must earn a place in heaven when he dies, and he doesn't think he has done that quite yet.
Okay, so this is very, very straight to the point. Doesn't say anything about Luther's early life. He was born to a fairly rich enough family. He gets educated for multiple years. He can read Latin. His father wants him to be a lawyer. So this skips over everything in his early life and goes right to the big point, the big turning point in his life, where his whole future of becoming a lawyer suddenly turns around because he's caught in a thunderstorm and he's scared of dying. How so then?
So he falls to his knees to pray, not to God, but to Saint Anna, so that she might ask God to look after him. And Luther promised that if God would see him safely through the thunderstorm, he would offer the rest of his life to God by becoming a monk.
Okay. We see that often with grief. They say there's 5 stages of grief, but we can also see a lot of this in when someone is under a very stressful situation and they're in danger. The 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and then finally acceptance. Well, let's replace grief with when someone's in a lot of danger and they have a little bit of time to think about it. First, there could be denial. And we don't know if Luther was denying that he was in danger at first, but we could imagine that he's out in the rainstorm and he's thinking, this isn't so bad, this isn't so bad, and then the thunder and lightning get really bad, and then he can't be in denial anymore. Perhaps he's angry at himself for not noticing it earlier. And he might go through a little depression or sadness because he's thinking he's going to die. But I'm really focused on the bargaining. So when he's powerless, and a lot of times people are powerless with grief, they can't fix the situation, or in Luther's case, he couldn't fix the situation, and he goes to bargaining. And he makes a bargain with God, saying, save me, and I will dedicate my life to the religion. Well, we know that this is not the end of Martin Luther, and he did survive, so did he hold up his end of the bargain.
Luther cannot understand it if God's intention is really for poor people to spend all their money buying their way out of punishment.
Okay, so we skipped over a lot again. So, well, this is the 5-minute version. Martin Luther does become a monk, and he was very good at school, so then he starts studying religion. He studies the Bible. He studies everything in the Bible. He studies the church teachings, and he's also asked to teach religion at a university. And so he's feeling conflicted because he sees that what the Bible says is different than what the church was doing. Nowhere in the Bible is a lot of the things the church and the Pope and the bishops are doing. And that's why he gets very, very conflicted.
Understand it if God's intention is really for poor people to spend all their money buying their way out of punishment so they can go to heaven. And why should it be easier for the rich to avoid a long time in purgatory than it is for the poor? He thinks it's way too much about money and too little about God.
And there's the indulgences. I don't know if they're going to explain it, but it boiled down to if someone could pay the church money, and the church wanted money for building projects and other projects, then they would spend less time in the in-between, between life and heaven, and go right into heaven.
When priests sell letters of indulgence with slogans such as, "When the coin in the coffer clings, the soul from purgatory springs," Luther wants to discuss this with other monks and priests, so he writes 95 theses and nails them to the church door in Wittenberg where he lives. The church door, you see, acts as a form of bulletin board and is a completely normal way to put things up for debate.
95 different things that he wants to talk about, conflicts with what the church is doing and what he reads and studies in the Bible. Then that's the term 95 theses. They do a good job here. He wants to discuss it. He doesn't want to overthrow the church. He doesn't want to start his own religion. He just wants to discuss it with other church members and scholars.
Luther is allowed to defend himself at a trial in the city of Worms. The church hopes that Luther will withdraw what he said and wrote, so that everything can return to normal.
One thing they skip over is he did have his debates. He did talk to a church representative, and the church representative was not prepared for Luther's logic and Luther's study, and Luther was an expert at what he was studying. And the church representative went back to the higher-ups and said, this guy really believes in what he's saying, and he's becoming very popular. So we skipped over the first one or two debates, and now we're on to less of a debate and almost a trial, in a sense that he wasn't on trial, but if he said something wrong, his words could be used against him. And what Luther was saying, criticizing the church, other people had been put in jail and excommunicated and kicked out of the church for saying the same thing. So this is a very, his words can get him in a lot of trouble at this stage.
But Luther will not. He maintains that if no one can prove him wrong through arguments or quotes from the Bible, he must be right. I cannot, and I will not regret what I have said. I cannot act against my conscience, Luther says. Not many in the audience have heard the word conscience before, but they are in no doubt as to whether Luther stands firm on his beliefs or not. As a result, they declare him an outlaw.
And so, when asked to recant, when asked to say, Luther, are you going to take back what you said against the church? He says, no, I stand by what I said. This is going to happen with the scientist Galileo. And Galileo did a lot of writings that went against the church's teachings on science. And when taken to a trial, when asked to say that he was wrong, Galileo did say that he was wrong. Because they threatened to excommunicate Galileo. He could be arrested. And so Galileo, for various reasons, agreed to say that he was wrong. Luther, oppositely, said that he could not take back what he had said. And thus, yes, Luther was summoned to even farther away for what's ostensibly a more trial.
An outlaw. This means that anyone now has a duty to catch him and hand him over to the authorities. After Luther has been outlawed, he is forced to hide. He hides at his friend Elector Frederick's castle.
No, that's not. That's not. Luther was actually on his way. Luther was on his way to more like hearings and trials and more discussions, presumably where he would be arrested and excommunicated, and his supporters actually kidnapped him. The people who liked Luther's kidnapped him and brought him to this castle and said, you must hide. So right there.
Up until then, the Bible has only existed in Greek and Latin. While hiding at Wartburg, Luther translates the entire New Testament into German. Luther wants people to have the opportunity to read the Bible in their own language, so they do not depend on the priests and the church's interpretation.
Okay, so that's not entirely true. There were translations in German before Luther, but Luther did it arguably better. Luther took it from the direct Latin and did an excellent translation. Scholars think his translation was very, very good. He did it in a short amount of time, which is amazing. So he wasn't the first, but he was the most popular, and it was his popularity and the quality of his translation that spread the German language Bible all over the area. So he wasn't the first, but he was the most influential translator of the Bible, and it was the one that got to the people.
Because Luther sees the Bible as God speaking to all people.
And that was the major difference, Luther focusing in on the Bible. And so you see, the first thing he does is make a Bible available to the average person as long as they could read in the language of the area, which was German.
When people get access to reading the Bible themselves, they also begin to use the words of the Bible as an argument for all sorts of things. Luther has started something he cannot control. His new thoughts are used as arguments in the power struggles of princes, in revolts, and in the struggle between kings, princes, and the Pope about who actually decides what. Soon, everyone is quarreling and fighting. Some even go to war. Luther had dreamt about changing the church, he knew. But his thoughts ended up splitting the church in two, the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. And that soon becomes important for many other things than the church.
That's about as simplified as you can get. Hits the major themes of Luther's life, which would be, became a monk, made a deal with God to become a monk, became a monk, read and studied the Bible, saw conflict between the church and the Bible, nailed 95 theses up on the church doors, was mostly against the sale of heaven through what was called indulgences, debated with some church officials, was basically unofficially found guilty of talking about against the church, had to go into hiding, and while in hiding, wrote a German version, language version of the Bible, and those ideas and Luther as a symbol then spread in many other, in the area, the German area, and many other countries decided to break away with their own Protestant versions of Christianity. So it hits on the main points. It's very, very simplistic and straightforward. I liked it though. Good vid.